Yes, the meeting is being recorded, and let's just start. I see a lot of people are already in here, and it's wonderful to see how many people are showing up to this lecture, which is belongs to our lecture series in fine art, which is what we call an innovative training network supported by the Skłodowska-Curie Actions of Horizon 2020, led by the University of Wolverhampton. And well, fine art is an acronym for the future of European independent art spaces in a period of socially engaged art. Now, to get all of that right. And for the lecture tonight, or this afternoon, depending on, or this morning, depending on where you are, we have the honor and pleasure to be able to listen to Anna Santomauro and Viviana Checchia, who will tell us about Vessel, a cultural institution, organization that they founded in Bari in southern Italy. And they will speak for about 40 to 50 minutes, and then we will have a discussion. And of course, I forgot the most important thing, which was to introduce myself. My name is Björn Thorsteinsson. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Iceland, and I will be, well, not running the show, but I will be trying to moderate the discussion. And as I said, they will, Anna and Viviana will speak for about 40 to 50 minutes, and then we will have ample time for discussion, which will of course proceed through this medium. You will be able to either ask questions directly or write questions in the chat if you find it hard to get through otherwise, but I will ask you to raise your hand. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Just to repeat what you probably already realized, that the lecture is being recorded. I will just briefly introduce Viviana Checchia and Anna Santomauro now. Well, Viviana is a curator, critic, and lecturer, active internationally, and she's currently senior lecturer in fine art at HTK Valand in Gothenburg, in Göteborg, in Sweden. And she founded, has been co-directing Vessel for the last 10 years, along with Anna. And Viviana specifically asked me not to give a too long and a too lengthy introduction about her and Anna. So now I will pass to the introduction about Anna. Anna Santomauro is a curator, educator, and researcher in micropolitics and socially engaged art, who founded Vessel in 2011, along with other people. Both of them are active internationally as curators, as lecturers, and as researchers. Anna is also a PhD candidate at the University of Wolverhampton. So I hope you forgive me for this introduction, and I will not keep it any longer. And now I will pass the word to you, Anna and Viviana, please.
Thanks, Björn, for the intro. And thanks, FEINART, for hosting this lecture. And thanks to all of you for attending, and a special thanks to the hundreds of practices that contributed to make Vessel what Vessel is today. We wish it could have been in person, but for now, we will enjoy this virtual encounter and make the best of it. My name is Viviana Checchia, and I will be presented with my now long-standing partner in crime, Anna Santomauro. Today, we are wearing a double-layered hat. As the co-founders of Vessel since 2011, and as co-directors of this chameleontic organization with Nicoletta Daldanese from 2014. Anna and I will be presenting, speaking, reading, reflecting with you for around 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. The presentation will be pretty visual, not many quotes, but lots of images. The references we will use are mainly, though not exclusively, from the South, the epistemology we are rooted in, even without our nomadic profile. I'm just waiting for the presentation. We would like to clarify our use of and position on the term of socially engaged, so that you can keep that in mind during the presentation of our thoughts and our projects. With socially engaged, we refer to practices whose catalyst is society. Their point of departure is a social issue. They do not have to be socially engaged in the sense of recreating a sociable situation through participation of human beings or animals or plants. So Vessel's social engagement is expressed towards society, its culture, and at times its members too, of course, though not always directly. In that respect, we would also like to inform you that Vessel, as a curatorial organization, does not commission socially engage our project as a default approach, but we wish to see that the ethos of socially engaged art informs our way of working, therefore our practice embodies social engagement. The structure of the lecture will follow the preface of the book by social scientist Franco Cassano, titled Il pensiero meridiano, Southern Thinking. We decided to use Meridian in the translation rather than Southern, which is how the title of the book is officially translated. Meridian hints at the conjunction of space and time, which seemed appropriate for this occasion. The first edition of this book was published in 1996. After a wide distribution and various poignant critiques of the book, Cassano decided to write an exhaustive preface to address some of the critiques as well as potential reflections he had made between 1996 and 2004. In the 2005 edition, the preface is divided into 4 sections titled Autonomy, Slowness, Mediterranean, and Measure. These 4 focuses will guide our lecture and will function as lenses through which to see the practice developed during the last 10 years by Vessel. The presentation will not follow a linear chronological timeline. Instead, we will refer to specific projects that Vessel has developed throughout its existence on the basis of these 4 lenses. For those of you who are not familiar with Vessel, we will now share a link that I will put in the chat. Here you go. And you will see some screenshot from our recent website. Vessel is a nomadic curatorial organization and agency invested in supporting artistic and curatorial practices that are situated, responsive, and research-led. Driven by a biographical and epistemological belonging to the South, the Southern Europe and Mediterranean regions in particular, we are interested in how social and ecological imagination can be enhanced in order to critically engage with the sets of conditions and infrastructures that sustain contemporary culture practices. Vessel has devoted great attention to the definition and development of socially engaged art practice and contributed internationally by way of the application of socially engaged tools and methods in contemporary curatorial practice, always from a perspective other than the mainstream. Vessel's practice, embedded in an ongoing art of hosting and being host, manifests itself through public programming, commissioning, and writing. In the last 10 years, Vessel has participated and contributed to the shaping and understanding of curatorial practice epistemologically connected to a locale or locality, though not by default based within it. The objective we have for today is to share a theoretical understanding of our socially engaged curatorial practice within Vessel, and then explain how that can inform and guide alternative approaches. We hope to share this with you as clearly as possible, and we hope to get some interesting feedback and questions to shape our ongoing research and practice. So let's start with autonomy. The floor is yours, Anna.
Thanks, Viviana. And yeah, I want to echo Viviana in thanking FEINART for organizing the lecture and Bjorn for the introduction. So starting from the notion of autonomy, I would say that it's one of the crucial ones in Franco Cassano's understanding of the Southern thought. There are basically 3 ways in which he talks about autonomy that resonate with what has been so far driving Vessel's work. The autonomy of the South in opposition to the universalism of the dominant culture, which he identifies as belonging to the North, be it global North or Northern Italy. The autonomy of representation, or the South's rebellion to its representation, which in the words of Cassano is, and I quote, torn between a tourism heaven and a corrupted hell, end quote. And the autonomy of the route towards emancipation for Southern Italy, which in Cassano's view should exceed the national horizon and resituate itself within a South-to-South network of relationships. So Vessel's work has been mainly concentrated in the region of Puglia in the southeast of Italy, here where the red dot is. Puglia is one of the regions historically at the core of the so-called Questione Meridionale, the Southern Question, an expression that broadly identifies the economic, political, and cultural gap between Northern and Southern Italy in the aftermath of the country's unification in the 19th century. In the main historical accounts of the Southern Question, this gap hints at the arretratezza, the backwardness of the South, and at the need to level North and South on the premise that the latter should catch up with the former. This temporal hiatus entails that the South is in a structural, ongoing position of delay or lateness, and of impossible and passive imitation of the North. Cassano seeks to break away from this view, repositioning Southern Italy and the South in general as the subject and not the object of its own thought. Puglia's recent social, cultural, and economic history can be considered as emblematic of this dynamic. Historically, the economy of the region has been mostly based on agriculture and services, while the industrial sector is mainly based on small and medium-sized firms. In the last 50 years, two highly capital-intensive large-scale plants, such as ILVA, which is in steelmaking, and ENI, which is based on petrochemicals, have deeply changed the socioeconomic landscape of parts of the region, providing salaried jobs within small port cities and introducing modes of organization closer to the metropolis working class rather than the traditional fishing communities of the area. Initially owned by the state company Italcida, in the 1960s, the steelmaking company ILVA in Taranto combined its economic strategy with a social and cultural one. For instance, through the Rivista Italcida, the company's magazine that commissioned artists, covers and illustrations around the future of the city. So in order to bring together intellectuals and cultural producers around the vision for the city itself. In 2012, ILVA was investigated for environmental crimes and pollution. While plants with a similar environmental impacts have been dismantled in different parts of Italy, one of them being Porto Marghera near Venice, ILVA is still functioning and still polluting, forcing parts of the city to go into lockdown, which now we know what it is, when the levels of dioxin in the air are too high. Since 2008, tourism has been on the top of the Regional Council's agenda, presented as inextricably linked to the promotion of both traditional and contemporary culture. Large-scale institutions like Apulia Film Commission were founded, which invited international cinema productions to come and shoot their own productions in Puglia, benefiting from the Mediterranean light and landscapes. In a similar vein, tourists were invited to leave behind their stressful lives and fall in love with Puglia through large-scale campaigns that sought to rebrand and represent the region as the idyllic and authentic place where to live the good life. In the same years, architect David Chipperfield was commissioned for the project to renovate the Brutalist Theatre in Bari and to turn it into a contemporary art museum, which so far has not happened. Over the course of around 8 years, the region started to appear as the anomaly of the South, a fertile territory for new innovative ideas and for massive touristic influx, leaving behind the burden of the representation and perception that the Southern Question had imposed on the region. Viviana and I founded Vessel in 2011 in the midst of the so-called Primavera Pugliese, the Puglia Spring, which I should say was completely non-intentional and it has no connections with the Arab Spring, which happened in those same years. In 2008, the regional government started to invest a large part of the European Union's funding for regional development in order to promote youth policies and culture. This has been one of the strategies that the Regional Council has adopted to try and stop the traditional move of young people, students and workers towards the north of Italy or to the rest of Europe in search for better education and job opportunities. Since then, through European funding, hundreds of young creative projects focused on different disciplines have been supported with a grant of €25,000 to be spent in just 1 year time. And in order to spend this money, they also had to become legal entities. So we had associations, cooperatives, and a few new companies that mushroomed throughout the region. And you can see on the bottom left, the image is showing all the different projects and initiatives that started during that specific period of time. And those transformed in very short time Puglia into a laboratory for social innovation. Those that chose to establish themselves as a not-for-profit organization could not access any further regional funding and support. Those instead that opted for a for-profit status were able to apply for further grants. Wessel was born in the context of this regional program. And from the outset, the main challenge for us was to operate within a region with a very fragile set of infrastructures that at the same time was undergoing a process of acceleration and self-exotization. We decided to withdraw from the way the region was representing itself by avoiding the then dominant logic of the festival, of the big event, and of the traditional exhibition, and by introducing ways of artistic and curatorial production mostly based on conversation, dialogue, experience, and process without an end product. Rather than focusing on a tangible outcome, since its inception, Wessel has been performing a process of dynamic discussion that could be considered as a space for resistance from the cultural and touristic commodification that the region was undergoing. In particular, we moved away from the format of the exhibition, partially to escape the choice to either display international artists whose practices we were both following, brave cutting-edge political works that we might have encountered in biennials or exhibitions abroad, or to present the work of artists from the region to give them national and international visibility. Instead, we opted for the creation of a porous infrastructure, an organization that could be open, flexible, and even prone to failure at times, and that could facilitate the encounter of international artistic and curatorial practices with local cultural and art workers, self-organized collectives, and practitioners from different fields. The specificity of the region provided a fertile terrain for these encounters and the context for different types of artistic and curatorial research to happen. This mode of instituting provided us with a space of curatorial autonomy, both from the global art system expecting peripheries to mirror what was happening in the main capitals, and from the regional government agenda that instead was looking for responses to a sudden desire for contemporaneity. Our work has taken place in urban settings like the capital city of the region, Bari, as well as in rural areas. In 2015, we initiated Terra Piatta, which means a flat land, a program of art-led inquiries that over 3 years brought together artists engaging with themes of ecology, land use, and agriculture, together with farmers, workers, activists, and architects based in the region. We focused on a specific area of Puglia called the Capitanata, which is in the northernmost part of the region, the so-called granary of Italy, where agriculture is the main activity and the few industries present are mostly devoted to food processing. Almost every peeled tomato in Europe comes from this area. Every year, 2 million tons of tomatoes are produced, but the revenues for local farmers are extremely low. The workforce involved in the harvesting of tomatoes is mainly composed by undocumented migrants. I would like to invite you to find out more about the controversial politics of tomatoes in a reportage by Al Jazeera that is called The Dark Side of Italian Tomatoes. So Viviana, maybe you can put the link in the chat. During the fascist regime, exactly this area in the north of Puglia was deeply affected by the agrarian reform that implied a plan of reorganization and reclamation of the land. What was previously marshlands and wetlands was made arable through the reform, and Mussolini's regime introduced a territorial and social planning based on the construction of borgate, which were small villages, and poderi, farmhouses, in which many among former soldiers and peasants settled, inhabiting fascist modernist architecture. In each borgata, the territory was equally portioned to include a school, church, a market, and public offices, in order to avoid daily commute to the main cities. The system in itself failed soon after the collapse of fascism in Italy. The local people were not enjoying the isolation of the borgate, which resulted in the abandonment of podere and return to the city during the economic boom in the 60s. These areas were forgotten or ignored as part of the refusal of those dark times in Italian history. Many of them, through the years, have attained considerable autonomy, having to solve and sustain by themselves questions of security, justice, education, and other services. Others, that were increasingly in ruins, are often inhabited by seasonal workers. Up until now, in this particular area, and in the context of the program Terapiata, we have developed a residency with artist Fernando Garcia Dori in collaboration with architects collective Escape, where the artists met local farmers, cheesemakers, artists, educators, and members of local councils to map out the desires for the future of the borgate and to seek to define what a network of these small villages could look like and could become. We also developed Tre Titoli, which is a new film commissioned by artist Nico Angiuli, scripted and performed with seasonal workers, mainly undocumented people from Ghana, originally from Ghana, working in the harvest of tomatoes. The film brought together migrant and Italian workers to collectively explore the legacy of Giuseppe Di Vittorio, one of the founders of the Italian unions, who as a young boy was an exploited peasant himself in that same area in the early 20th century. We also held a curatorial workshop led by Nuno Sacramento and Sanne Ortuizen, where we spent 4 days in a local farmhouse exploring social practices within non-urban context with a group of 15 international curators. A series of artist-led workshops titled Rural in Action, engaging local communities in artistic and civic practices that sought to address themes of ecology within peripheral contexts. I should mention that the title of this particular set of workshops draws inspiration from Culture in Action, the iconic project curated by Mary Jane Jacob in Chicago in the early 90s, where artists were brought into dialogue with communities in different parts of the city. And as some of you might be familiar with, this project really marked the shift from more traditional forms of public art into what was later called new genre public art by artist Susan Lacey. So Cassano's point about Southern Italian emancipation and the need to resituate it within a different geographical and cultural horizon is particularly relevant here. In 1926, just before his imprisonment, Gramsci wrote about the Southern question, La questione meridionale, in a series of essays that were later collated in a pamphlet, where he identified the root causes for the Italian Southern and Northern blocks in the different economic and infrastructural forms of organization. I won't have the time to delve into it now, but what I wanted to highlight with regards to this is that Gramsci urged the urban proletarians back then to become allies of peasants in the southern countryside in order to initiate that process of collective emancipation for the South. But this project was never fully accomplished. I just thought it might be interesting and helpful to quickly step out of Franco Cassano's narrative around autonomia. To very briefly touch upon autonomia with a capital A, which is a movement that in the 1970s was populating and mobilizing universities and factories in Rome, Bologna, Padova, Turin, Venice, Milan, and other cities in northern Italy. For those of you who are not familiar with it, autonomia was an extra-parliamentary political and social movement and theory that was emerging from Italian workerism, that adopted forms of resistance such as slow working, socialization in the workplace, sabotage, and other subversive activities. Autonomia had echoes and built alliances internationally, but very little is known about the resonances of autonomia in the southern Italian context, where southern autonomies, so autonomie meridionali as a plural, mobilized in different regions, but they became quite invisible in the main historical accounts of the movement because of the heterogeneous composition and the different forms of action, which never quite resulted in a unified voice. So to conclude this section, over the last 10 years, Wessel has sought to engage with possible grammars of social change in the context of the Southern question. And on a very small scale, we have tried to reimagine what an arts organization or simply a curatorial project can do by redefining our cognitive and affective relationship to the region and by making a place we are both invested in, simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar for us and for others. I think, Viviana, maybe now you can talk to us about slowness.
So Southern thinking and Wessel have got an issue in common. The invitation to slowness gets easily misunderstood. Though the majority of people encountering this approach would become fascinated by it and interested in its applications, there is a minority, both for Cassano's book and our curatorial organization, that would interpret the slowness as a way to somehow idealize the South and give it some attributes it never really had. Obviously, that would be a clear misunderstanding of the idea and practice of slowness as something attributed to the South, since this specific approach is something celebrated by various Northern thinkers and projects too. But certainly what interested Wessel the most was to disconnect the idea of speed from the idea of progress, as if acceleration would forever go hand in hand with human development. In all these years of practice, Wessel has experienced a very slow pace, made of brief appearances and sometimes long disappearances. Within this ethic, Wessel has also embraced an everyday-based structure, rather than an event-driven structure. This has meant that we have privileged the day-by-day running of Wessel and the evolving life of Wessel, rather than living in the mindset of preparation for the next something spectacular. So now I would like to share with you the content of our historical website. These are some entries from 2011, 2012. And the interesting thing is the style of these entries. We were using the website as a diary. We were inputting things that are happening on our daily basis, just as this is what we are going through, rather than announcing this is a public event or this is something you should attend. So it was really a way to present to the world what is that is happening within Wessel, how is that the organization is evolving. So since 2011, Wessel has been running the International Curatorial Workshop, conceived as an attempt to rethink educational models and to test what a self-organized curatorial para-institution can do in a peripheral context. International Curatorial Workshop consists of a 4-day gathering that brings together groups of international curators willing to explore different questions, such as curating as a situated practice, the legacy of institutional critique in contemporary institutional and non-institutional practices, curatorial approaches to socially engaged art, self-education, and hospitality as a site for knowledge production. The various editions of the International Curatorial Workshop were created in collaboration with the University of Bari, European Cultural Foundation, Roberto Cimetta Foundation, Van Haben Museum, Monash University, and Konstfack. During these days, we would take it slow, though intensively, give space to dialogue, and spend around 4 or 5 hours per day making food, eating, drinking, and conversing. In the so-called tyranny of the urgent, as defined by Moroccan politologist Zaki Laidi, or so-called acceleration society, even dialogue and democratic sharing is considered as a waste of time. Wessel was and is conscious that conviviality, cum vivere, as Cassano calls it, is as valuable and important as moments of presentations and workshops. Most of the relevant and long-term partnership Wessel witnessed and developed were in part germinated during a lunch or a dinner. Here a gentle reminder, we are talking about 2011, 10 years ago, when attention towards care and questions of hospitality was perhaps not as present within the contemporary art discourse as now. Wessel has been living in a multiplicity of times, and we have tried to preserve the long term as an important value in the establishment of meaningful engagements. Another concept that can help us express Wessel's approach to slowness and de-accelerated rationality is a concept coming from the global south, termed non-krong. As independent artist and researcher Sonia Dahl explained in her 2016 article, Non-Krong and the Non-Productive Time in Yogyakarta Contemporary Arts, at first glance, non-krong just means hanging out. This literal translation does not do justice, however, to the deep and complex societal and intellectual value of this activity. This slow and fluid form of dialogical exchange has been a way in urban settings within Indonesia to learn from people's differences, explore in depth the meaning of life, and challenge their view of the world in a conversation. And also in collective ways. Compared with modes of Western dialogical sharing and conversation, the non-krong can appear extremely unproductive, not focused, unstructured, and therefore useless, at least according to an accelerated capitalistic logic. The reality is that this mode of interaction is highly conducive to collaborative work. People find their time to express themselves. They do not feel the pressure of speeding to a conclusion or a final outcome, and are therefore not moved by competition, but by a sense of solidarity. Ruang Grupa, a curatorial collective from Indonesia, now renowned, as we all know, for their appointment as next directors of the Documenta Castle, they try to incorporate this principle within their modus operandi, a first step towards emulating the durational and cooperative exchange and iterated meaning-making of non-krong. Rather than deploy a pretested, recognizable production modus of exhibitionary form, they have opted for a non-mainstream way of discourse production embedded within Indonesian society. This corresponds to the ways in which Wessel has tried to operate embedded in local epistemologies. A good example would be tavoli di lavoro, workshop tables, and specifically the episode with local artist Nico and Julie. So what we would do at the time was that we would open the space of Wessel apartment for local artists. They could propose a topic of interest, part of a future project they wanted to develop, a research that was ongoing. And then what would happen? We would study it and invite other curators or specialists of other fields, people that could brainstorm together with the artists so that we would accompany the research part, the research development. So in this case, in the collage of little images that you see, for Nico and Julie's Tavolo di Lavoro, we were brainstorming about the mechanization of human body with the development of agriculture, and we therefore invited choreographers, scenographers, art historians, other curators and artists, as well as experts of agriculture to understand exactly how the work could be developed and perhaps translated within a project or a performance or an installation. So I would like to show you now two videos that will try to, I think, translate quite well visually how is that the artist rearticulated the research. So as you can see in this one, it has no sound, so don't panic. You are not meant to hear anything at this point, but there are 3 images, as you can see. So the screen is divided in 3 parts, and these are different temporalities. So historically, there is like some sort of development from a first age in which the agricultural labor is performed by human beings only, then labor performed sometimes with the help of animals, and then this later stage in which the mechanization had already started. Now, if we go to the second video, which was produced during the period of residency at Negra, you will see in Spain, you will see exactly the same use of image, and you will try to understand how, in this case, the artists use the same methodology. So as you can see, not only a research within the concept, but also a research within methodologies that can be used in the artistic research. But in this case, we'll present a different situation with migrants, workers in the south of Spain.
Estamos pensando que cuando vinimos aquí a España cambiamos la vida.
سيروا ادخل شويه عز الدين، ادخل شويه، وعز الدين وحمد يدخل شويه هكاك، ما عليك سير شويه زيد وزيد راك تحط العود، زيد عود وفر عز الدين على جهه وحده، على جهه الدور هكا بارك الله فيك، بارك الله فيك هكاك احمد. وخرج واحد شويه وعز الدين، خرج واحد شويه، خرج واحد شويه بان، خرج عز الدين، الاخر يوسف هكاك تما بس بان هكاك. وخرج شويه هكا. وبارك عليكم ياتا.
The third pillar of Franco Cassano's southern thought is the Mediterranean. And it is seen by the author as a site of contamination, of hybridation, and of exchange. This is a matter of great interest for Wessel, which we have developed particularly through 2 projects, Radio Materiality and the Institute for the Imagination of the Mediterranean. Both projects invited artists and curators to consider being situated in the Mediterranean region as a starting point to develop a series of art-led inquiries. Radio Materiality invited artists to reflect on the notion of transmission and on ways of performing it through a series of residencies. Each artistical intervention was the result of a deep dialogue between us, the curators, the artists themselves, and local associations, activists, and practitioners. We operated as curators and as co-producers of each action, accompanying the artists in the accumulation and in the processing of knowledge about the territory, highlighting specific issues that the artists could deal with and facilitating the creation of relational context for them to operate within. Bisan Abu Aisha investigated the state of confinement around the life of a segment of political refugees in the region, and focused on the role that art and creativity play in situations of segregation and imprisonment. This interest has been informing a very large part of the artistic research of Bissam, and it is related to the experience of his father being confined in an Israeli prison during the 80s. On that occasion, the artist's father illegally built a radio device in order to let news and information enter the prison. So it was a way for the inmates not to lose connection with the outside. The artist worked with migrants whose refugee status was in the process of being approved. Some of them were occupying a school, an abandoned school in Bari, Socrate Occupato. And the idea for the artist was to have a series of workshops about how to build radio devices and how to create radio programs to broadcast to the surrounding areas. Artist Elena Cologni enacted a series of conversations between herself and the group of mothers based in Bari to share the emotional and psychogeographical condition of motherhood in the city. These meetings instigated conversations on the concept of trust and on the social and urban dimension of being mother implies, especially in a city like Bari, which is suffering from a lack of support and infrastructure for families, and where often women perform duties of care that normally social welfare should provide. The Catalan artist Jaume Ferrete developed in Bari a step of his project called Voz Rara, an attempt to hybridize situated knowledges and practices about local feminist legacy with an ongoing research on the uses, functions, and accidents of voice. Through an exploration of the workshop format, the artist introduced the topic of the voice within different forms of activism and engagement related to feminism and LGBTQ+ struggles, by defining a series of connections between voice and power structures and between voice and the public sphere in the southern Italian context. Artist Leone Contini investigated the notion of reciprocity between Puglia and Albania by building a homemade antenna in order to capture the Albanian TV signal from the old harbor of Bari. At the beginning of the 90s, several Albanian citizens migrated to Italy and reached the coasts of Puglia first. They were well acquainted with Italian culture and with the language, and partially that's because of the role of Italian broadcasts. Some of them had been building illegal homemade antennas that would allow them to capture foreign broadcasts. The artist had been researching how to build an antenna, and for days during the residency, he tried to create a similar device with cans, a pan, and pieces of wood. After many attempts for almost half an hour, we managed to watch the Albanian news. The process spontaneously involved students, migrants, retired people, and everybody who had surprisingly some expertise around how to make a homemade antenna to share with us. So it was interesting to think about the moment when the news were broadcasted via the television and via the homemade antenna made by the Leone, which was completely unplanned and unexpected. So the audience was, was not really aware to be an audience, actually. Initiated in 2018, the Institute for the Imagination of the Mediterranean looks at artist modes of organization in the Mediterranean region. Artists whose practices adopt cooperative methodologies and whose research manifests itself through social and political processes were brought into dialogue with regional groups and constituencies whose multiple forms of engagement operate locally and translocally. In the context of the Institute for the Imagination of the Mediterranean, artist Luigi Coppola developed a segment of his ongoing project, Evolutionary Populations, a commoning practice inspired by the geneticist Salvatore Ceccarelli. The practice of evolutionary populations involves sowing mixtures containing hundreds of different varieties of seeds, which come from different geographic areas of the world, and leaving it to the earth to choose the varieties that grow depending on climatic and soil conditions. Through this ongoing dialogue with local organizations and experts who work on the care of common goods and sustainable material conditions in agriculture, the artist has created a series of gardens and is in the process of creating more gardens in Bari, inspired by his ongoing research into evolutionary populations. The project is going to continue throughout 21 and 22. Vessel's social practice reflects on what scholar Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls the epistemicide, that consists in the erosion of local cultures and epistemologies, including nature and the relationship between human and non-human. In Puglia, the sudden shift from a nearly feudal use of the land to a capitalistic one was accompanied through the indiscriminate use of pesticides, the imposition of monoculture, and the gradual loss of biodiversity and of knowledges. Our ongoing interest towards ecology, land, and agriculture that now is manifesting through the collaboration with Luigi is not an attempt to recuperate pre-industrial values and practices, so it's not immersed in any form of nostalgia, but it's instead an attempt to resituate our work in between cultures and in between modes of practicing and in between different ecological modes of living.
Measure here is to be understood through Cassano as the capacity and potentiality of cultural cohabitation. Cohabitation without hegemony or subjugation of any culture involved. Cassano encourages us to celebrate the fact that all cultures have got something precious within them. And to extend this, we see measure as a description of and an invitation to a condition of balance. Within the book Southern Thinking, measure is offered as a balance point between the land and the sea. The land as the space of identity and social connections, and the sea as the departure point, the adventure, the play of individual freedom. For Wessel, our measure consists in the relationship between local and global, settled and nomadic. We didn't want to dominate the local scene. We wanted to find a way in which local and international experiences could live together in balance. Wole Soyinka, Nigerian writer and poet, compares Western culture to a train that proceeds to seek and gather the new at every station stop, getting and accelerated eye out of the discovery and acquisition of something new and another thing new. Whereas, for example, African theater focuses on human knowledge and productive connections with society. Wessel has been aiming to achieve this connection between us and society, where the relation with the other is for a better understanding of who we are collectively. This a favored approach rather than the indiscriminate accumulation or propagation of novelties. When encountering a being off measure or imbalanced, sometimes it is necessary to react with a strong stroke in the opposite direction. So for Wessel, the exhibition was a Western dominant format that needed to be addressed and rebalanced somewhat given our context. As said, sometimes the only way to address lack of balance, a lack of measure, is by making a move or moves in the opposite direction. The Kenyan writer and poet Ngugi wa Thiong'o proposes in his book, Moving the Center, the struggle for cultural freedom. We need to reshuffle the center of the world. The measure is for Franco Cassano a very complex construction, brave, trying to save all multiplicities by giving each one of them value and relevance. The example I'm about to share might illuminate some of this thinking in our curatorial work. Rather than aim for an exhibition, the decision of a bus tour and the sharing of ongoing research, bringing together local issues with global protagonists, was deemed to be the best approach for the project work in progress. And what we are showing now is a video made by artist Daniele Guadalupi, project work in progress in collaboration with curator Aria Spinelli. And in case you want to watch it full length, I will also share the link in the chat.
Maura c'è, Daniele c'è, Azzurra c'è.
Se la Mofoteo ci raggiunge qui. Allora,
adesso noi vi consegneremo un piccolo kit, molto semplice, una tavoletta, una piccola mappa bianca. Questa scatola qui noi la metteremo adesso a terra, la potrete aprire, potrete prendere quello che c'è dentro e usarlo come volete. Io vi chiedo di usare questa mappa bianca, lo vedete, il porto di Brindisi come era nel 1871. Qualsiasi tipo di suggestione o di emozione che vi suscita questo luogo vorrei che l'appuntaste qui sopra. Questo come gli altri luoghi che andremo a vedere, c'è di tutto qui, c'è l'industria, c'è il mare, c'è la storia, cioè ognuno di noi è portatore di informazioni e di contenuti. Poi noi domani, i due gruppi di lavoro di Bari e di Brindisi, ci rincontreremo a Bari nello spazio di Wessel e riprenderemo tutto questo materiale e cercheremo di organizzarlo per farne una sorta di diario del viaggio che abbiamo fatto oggi.
Componete il kit così. Guardate, vi potete comporre il kit così, un brevetto. Il sacchetto per raccogliere reperti in giro, quello che vi va, quello che vi chiama lui, insomma, non lo cercate voi, fatevi chiamare dal reperto. E la mappa come diario da compilare strada facendo. Noi siamo qui, quindi all'uscita appunto del porto interno e nel porto medio. Questo poi è il porto esterno.
Chi vuole aprire la scatola, lì ci sono alcuni contenuti, sia di testo che delle immagini. Usateli, passateli.
Lo vedi com'era? Guarda, guarda!
Sì, me la ricordo. Solo che ci sono venuta poche volte.
Adesso ho detto, ma che sto posto non è lo stesso, non è possibile. Mia mamma e mio papà che mi portavano qui a fare il bagno. Brava, guarda, gli ombrelloni. Era una cosa bellissima. Con l'acqua pulita, cristallina.
Però c'è qualcosa
Che non ti quadra? Voglio vedere una foto. Cioè, io venivo con la motobarca, facevamo tutto il corso a piedi, prendevamo la motobarca e arrivavamo qua.
Poi c'erano gli scogli e quindi le cabine stavano fin dove c'è adesso quel muro che serve retto soltanto nel e la sabbia arrivava fin sopra dove stanno gli scogli. Quindi la fotografia è fatta da qui sicuramente.
Una ape, una farfalla, un fiore, una farfalla.
Ecco. Questa prima tappa è importante anche per un altro motivo. A parte Santa Polinare, questa spiaggia mitica degli anni 60 a Brindisi, questo è anche il luogo dove è nata Brindisi, perché dietro quella casa, quella punta lì, si chiama Punta Le Terrare, che al momento è il sito archeologico più antico, diciamo, della città di Brindisi. C'era un villaggio dell'età del bronzo, quindi dovete pensare che sopra quella collinetta, cioè dovete fare lo sforzo di immaginare delle capanne, ed era un villaggio dove si sperimentavano le prime forme di agricoltura, dove si andava a caccia, e quindi pensate che subito dopo il villaggio poi qua sicuramente partiva una zona di dune e c'era foresta. Quindi pensate che nell'età del bronzo, mentre noi stiamo qua, cioè qui in questo preciso punto può darsi pure che stava passando un lupo, no?
Gli dovrebbe durare un'ora io spero.
9:30.
Beh, 10 e mezza.
Prima eravamo qua a Santa Polinare, siamo saliti sul pullman per darvi l'idea del viaggio, dello spostamento, siamo scesi dietro l'angolo qui. Questo canale qui è Fiume Piccolo.
adesso c'è Capobianco Pedale.
We would like to conclude with an acknowledgement. In his book, Epistemologies of the South, Boaventura de Sousa Santos chooses to start with two manifestos. They run in parallel, one on the right-hand side of the page, the other on the left-hand side of the page. One is the Manifesto for Good Living, Buen Vivir, and the other is the Manifesto for Intellectual Activists. At the very beginning of this second manifesto, Boaventura confesses this book is probably never going to reach the right people it has been written for or lead to any practical application. We would like to tell Boaventura the book has successfully reached some of the people it was supposed to reach, and Vessel has been trying to translate it into practice for a few years. We sincerely hope that our efforts over the last 10 years and years to come are worth something. Even when we feel invisible, when we are non-spectacular, we are still making a contribution in the world, and this is, for us, the greatest achievement of our socially engaged curatorial practice. We know Zoom is not the best platform to engender non-krong, but we would like you to feel comfortable to open your mic and join some discussion, pose questions, and share your thoughts. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Viviana and Anna, for a wonderful presentation, an extremely inspiring talk for all of us. And thank you also for being so generous at the end. And, you know, because I was thinking maybe this format is not good for everyone, but we should try this. Let us try this, that you simply, what you do is that you raise your hand. You probably know this by now, but there is this button on the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, which is called reactions. And if you press it, then you can raise your hand. If you want to. And I will pass the word to whoever does that, and this will happen, I believe, very democratically. But if anyone doesn't feel comfortable with this, then feel free to write a question in the chat, and I will try to bring that in also. We have about half an hour for questions and discussions, and I'm sure that some of you have comments or questions or remarks to make to Viviana and Anna. So please. Anyone want to raise a hand?
Can I say hi?
Yes, please introduce yourself, John.
Yeah, I'm John Roberts. I'm the project manager for Fine Art. In fact, we were talking about epistemologies of the South in the colloquium this afternoon, or talking about it in passing. So it was great that you could bring up its arguments in a living context. And in the light of that, maybe Anna, you could say a few words about what is most engaging and fruitful in his position, because it's an incredibly rich and multiplicitous book. So perhaps you could single out a few things that you're particularly concerned with that would be helpful, I think, for the ESRs. So.
Should I go for it, Anna? I think that Anna did a brief mention connected with the idea of epistemicide. And also I think we are quite interested in the idea of the abyssal line. But in general, this idea of how is that knowledge can be revitalized, recuperated, reappropriated, and not disappear. And trying to acknowledge epistemicide as a problem as big as other problems happening in different forms of capitalist system and capitalist dynamics that are dominating in the world in which we live right now. So I would say that for us has been like a drive that we used. We implemented conceptually the epistemology of the South also within a specific curatorial workshop that was in collaboration with Monash University and with curator Tara McDowell. And in that case, it was about writing as a curatorial practice as writing. So this idea about how you write stories, how you create narratives, how you try to transmit ideas for them not to disappear, and for everybody to have equal relevance and equal voices within the recreation of future narratives. Specifically, the point that Anna was mentioning before when she mentioned the epistemicide, we were connecting it with Luigi Scoppola's project, because that project specifically tackles the issue around agriculture and seeds and different vegetables, fruits that are entirely disappearing from our horizon. And in that case, because of capitalism and the implementation of monoculture. And for us, what is important is not just that, oh, this romantic idea that, oh, we can go back and find these fruits that we haven't seen for 50 years, but it's more about the epistemology. That epistemology, the fruits, the seed is us. That is our epistemology. Like the nature, the component nature of the epistemology is as important as any other part of the epistemologies. So knowledge also as the ecosystem, knowledge as the part of our life, knowledge as acknowledging that climate change means something different from people in different parts of the world, and that this monoculture is affecting badly also the south of Italy, as well as the north of Africa and various parts of Europe. John, have I answered your question?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's also a connection between Bonaventura de Sousa Santos's notion of the Baroque, which he borrows from Deleuze, that is a notion of the hybrid in action, and well, specifically Foucault's notion of subjugated knowledges or hidden knowledges. And I was wondering whether that played a part in your thinking when it comes to researching and organizing your projects.
I think it definitely did. And one of the projects that perhaps we didn't explore in more detail was Rural in Action. In that project, for instance, what we tried to do was to give equal chances to hidden knowledge coming also from farming communities. And so to create this understanding that all knowledges, even those that we can't see, that are not entirely activated, are really important, and they shouldn't conquer some part or a platform when they can be experienced and activated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Karen has a question.
Yes, thank you again for your wonderful talk. And it was really touching to see all the examples. I was just wondering how you connect with the rural society, so to say, the farmers, and how do you work together with them? And who are the people that join your projects?
Should I answer it, Viviana? Yeah, I guess the multiple answers to your question, Karen. There's definitely a strategy that we have learned through practicing, which is how do we engage, how do we even start the conversation, what is even the question that we are asking as outsiders or as people who come from that particular region and have connections already into place in that particular region, but who have not been living there for quite a long time. So the way we strategize it is by creating a network of practices that are already operating on the territory. And so what we try to encourage is an encounter between the artistic practices and the commoning practices that exist in the region. So for instance, we knew, also thanks to the regional program that I was describing at the start of the talk, we knew of a number of different projects, we knew of a number of different groups that were engaging with the issue of the land, with the issue of agriculture, and that were actually already trying to operate otherwise in the field of ecology. And so it's very much about creating connections with them and establishing a productive dialogue where there's a common understanding of what we can achieve together. And sometimes what we can achieve is not necessarily a material output, but it is an exchange of practices. So to go back to Viviana's example of Rural in Action, we hosted a series of workshops, and one of them was with an artist called Asunción Molinos Gordo, and together with Asunción, we explored and investigated with the local farmers or environmentalists from the region a whole vocabulary that is lost in relation to farming and in relation to nature. So we did this exercise of providing a different grammar or providing a different lexicon, let's say, for particular types of grains, particular types of seeds. So it was very much of a way of co-researching it. But yeah, we definitely start from a position of looking around and knowing that things are already happening, that groups are already operating, that common practices are taking place. It's very much our job to find them and to create connections between the artists, the curators, and those practices, and in a way defining a common terrain where there can be a productive exchange. But an interesting element to bring up is probably the fact that we often don't really have an audience. We've had audiences in various ways. Every now and then we have a public talk where we have 20, 30 people attending, and it's more like of a traditional kind of frontal presentation. But most of our work happens in the format of workshops. So we do this work of curating also the group of people and then expanding from that. This is why we often talk about working with constituents rather than with publics.
Thank you.
Okay, Alexei Pensin, next question.
Yes, hello. And again, I wanted to start from thanking you for this very good presentation. It's really one of the best I heard for a while, with such a balanced amount of theory and together with narrative and together with visual materials. It's really good and fascinated. But I was trying to oppose these charming, powers of your presentation and trying to kind of invent a critical question because I really feel inspired and etc. And also was very nice to see some friends in your presentation, like Victor Miziano, whom I spotted on one of the photographs, and it was really nice and immediately invites you to have this dreamy imaginaries about your previous encounters in Italy or somewhere else. So this is, but still I saw that it's a kind of interesting process happens within your presentation, because on the one hand, it starts from this narrative of gentrification, right? This Puglia region and somehow re-articulating its kind of historical legacies, commodifying it, etc., etc. And somehow logically it evokes this kind of legacies of the South, of the concepts which could oppose this logic of neoliberal kind of colonization, gentrification, etc., which was very clearly staged. I just wanted to, I'm just having this sort of, and also not only Bonaventure de Souza book, who many people know now because it was translated into English, but also many other books. I was really excited about this French book, La Tyrannie de l'Urgence, which should be interesting one. I didn't know about this book. It's some and this Moving the Center book, which looks also very relevant as a sort of the discourse you're constructing about this sort of tools we have to oppose this neoliberal kind of globalization, neoliberal sort of commodification of everything and putting everything on sale, which is kind of by the way, we're sitting all exactly in this sort of, as a country of which is not as slow as Italy, but rather vice versa, the cradle of this neoliberal Anglo-American capitalism. But so my question was also addressing this sort of tension. So on the one hand, and also through I realized through your presentation that because of the Ruan group from Indonesia is now going to be already directing the document, this discourse about this sort of the Sousa, but other sources, and these notions like slowness or hanging out. I just wrote down this Indonesian way of pronouncing non-krang or something similar. Yeah, so I saw that also the channel to making this discourse more kind of universal, giving it more visibility. But again, knowing art world quite well, I thought also it's a kind of could be a subtle way of gentrification of this notion as well. So my tricky question is about how you see this dilemma in the sense that, okay, there is this sort of gentrification which comes from these global patterns of neoliberal Anglo-American capitalism. And at the same time, there is this sort of resistance which also comes through a number of art institutions which somehow finally, and your work is really work well with these tendencies, resistance, etc. But do you see any traps here on this way of kind of potential gentrification of the discourse of the South as well? So this was my tricky question I tried to formulate.
Viviana, yeah.
Should I go for it? Okay. I don't know what happened, Alexei, but my birds really liked your voice. So they went all loud while you were posing the question. So I would say that this question is actually not new for Vessel. We faced this also in the past and quite often, maybe not with the same exact words about the risk of globalizing the Southern discourse, but more as this idea, why do you really want to bring internationalism to a place where you are actually taking so much care about the locality of it? And I don't know if I didn't explain it well enough, and I apologize for it, but the idea for us is really to recreate a balance. And in order for the risk of this globalization of Southern discourse to potentially be resisted, at least from us. So if you ask me, do you think there is a risk? My answer would be, yes, there is a risk. I can already tell you that when I started to use Boaventura de Sousa Santos in my PhD in 2011, it was quite a rare quotations or a rare references, probably because at that time, the English book was not still available. So I was reading either in Portuguese or in Spanish. So I'm not sure if it is for that reason or just because this global South and Southern narratives were not such a trendy thing and now are becoming more. But I would say that within the modus operandi of Vessel, we don't see that as a risk. We keep operating in a way that is still very low key. And it is part of what we want, partially is what we want to achieve. I don't think that our objective is to be mentioned someday as Ruan Grupa or to curate Documenta Caso. We are very happy with the position we inhabit, with this peripheral position and the in-between local and global, and trying to administrate how to create balance between these two entities. So I don't know if I answered totally, but in summary is, yes, there is a risk. Vessel is trying to avoid it.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you. Great answer. Also, so nice to hear the birds, but yes, next question, Sarah.
Can I add something to that? I was just thinking that, yeah, definitely the risk is there, and the way these narratives are co-opted, we've seen it in so many ways, in so many situations. Like thinking about 2011, we've seen the narrative of the protest, the Arab Spring, that all of that, like major art events, major biennials that always tried to absorb these kind of discourses. But I think at the moment what we are witnessing, and maybe I'm too hopeful, maybe I'm just too optimistic at the moment, but it just feels like artists are making more and more demands, and artists are becoming more and more, if you want, difficult to work with. As in, I think we are in a phase where institutions are getting less away with fake narratives, because artists are demanding for, you know, specific practices of care to be performed and to be enacted by the institutions. Or we see artists, you know, questioning the composition of board of trustees of institutions. We see that things are slowly changing, and I think the last year has demonstrated that there is an acceleration in it. So I'm hopeful and also very interested to see where this goes and whether there will be another form of cooptation of this trend or not.
I just wanted to add one second.
Very brief, Alexei. We have more questions.
Very brief, because we're also supporting this, that it's not just about, I agree with you, that it's not just about gentrification through art institution, but also many people just realized, you mentioned last year, it was a pandemic. People realized how slowness is much better sometimes than this sort of hectic 10 things in 1 hour life we had. So it's now, I just see complaint people here in UK about commuting starts again, all these things which are really associated with this life, which was completely kind of difficult and burning out many people. So it's not just about this, but it's real kind of use value of this discourse, not just its kind of fancy gentrification. So I think it's, you have bright prospects.
Thank you, Alexei. Next question goes to Sarah.
Hi, yeah, I was really interested in your workshops, and especially looking at the balance. And I did wonder how you measure and evaluate the outcomes of your social value and social impact of the workshops you do.
Anna, you want to go?
Yeah, but then you might also come into place. Yeah, I don't think we have like a specific strategy for each workshop. Something that maybe Viviana and I should mention and probably also admit is that after we received that initial grant from the regional council, we have received pots of money for specific projects, but we don't receive structural funds. So this means that we have a lot of freedom in the way we evaluate and in the way we assess what we do, which means that we also decide what the objectives of each project that we develop are. Sorry. So in a way, I guess we can be quite free in terms of, you know, attendance numbers. I work in an institution in the UK and I completely see the difference. What does it mean when you work for an organization that receives structural funds and that needs to report everything every year in terms of numbers, attendance and evaluations, and what it means instead to operate in a way more free manner as Vessel does, which comes with problems, obviously, which means that Viviana and I are not salaried by Vessel, and we always need to find alternative ways.
I understand what you're saying. So when you've worked with these localities, obviously you must have noted the social value of the workshops there through how they've worked, or the observations, or the conversations of the people involved. Has that just naturally come about?
Viviana, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. I think so. I think that's potentially the word that is creating misunderstanding is evaluation, because we don't do evaluation. That's true, but we have lots of self-reflection about what we actually recreate with people, and some of either the ethos or value that is coming directly from their practice is there verbally shared with us.
Yeah.
So it means that constantly we are learning about their own set of values, their own set of priorities, and then we need to recalibrate how we work with them. Most of the time, our work is not for people, but is with people. So they would actually express, this is what we would like to achieve. This is how we want to conduct the work. These are the principles that would guide what we are going to do with you. So we learned through these, and then we would reflect together with Anna and Nicoletta, the other co-director, and sometimes if other curators or artists or members of the communities are involved, together with them, to understand if some of the initial expectations have been encountered, to understand how we have transformed our practices by including, embedding some of these new values that we encountered during the work. But yeah,
but for shaping the future, really, through the narratives of what's gone on.
I would say that our practice is really generative, meaning that it constantly reflects on what happened, accumulates some of the things that were then recreated in that specific situation, and it's also a way of upcycling. I think we hate waste in general. So in the same way that you would try to use any jars or things in order to plant your plants or do other things, this is what we would do also with the practice that we conduct.
Thank you.
Yeah. But Sarah, the point that you were asking about the evaluation is actually really good to also reveal the financial backstage of the project, because obviously most of the time within organization in Northern Europe and perhaps in Central Europe, Continental Europe, or in certain cases in Southern Europe, the moment you receive funding, yes, you are reporting, so the evaluation is seen as a sort of bureaucratical thing to do. In our case, because we don't have that, it happened really rarely that we were requested to report and to give some feedback about the use of the money we had received. Then we have an entirely different life connected to evaluation. Yes.
Thanks, Viviana.
You're welcome. There is also a question in the chat.
Yes, I know there's one from Noah. Mamrut, would you like to read it yourself, Noah, or?
I can try to find it. Yeah, sorry, I was a bit in a silent mode today, so I was like, yeah, I would like to please ask about the project's nomadic organizational nature that I find really interesting. What have brought you to choose such format, and how do you feel it helps you in sustaining your work? I guess some of it was already answered now in the last question, or at least that's what I assume. Also, even though personally connecting to the notion of slowness and slowing down, do you find that you need to compromise on it or perhaps customize it in your correspondence with funding agencies?
So I think that somehow what we just answered helps. Yeah. So the position of nomadism, I would say, is not entirely by choice. It's because in order to survive, we need jobs, occupations, salaries from elsewhere. But the important thing for us is that we still keep investing in Puglia and in our south. And then about the pace, yes, I would say that we had to figure out ways to adjust. And Anna, is it okay if I reveal a little bit of the story of the pavilion? Yes. So we had applied in 2012 for some funding in order to get a big pot of money to actually renovate a building and then create our new venue. Potentially, we never really had this ambition of having a venue, but we wanted to try, and then also to recreate some programming. And the ministry sent a reply to this application in 2015. By that point, Anna was not living in Puglia any longer. I was not living in Puglia any longer. Our lives were in England and Scotland. We accepted the funding regardless because we thought it was important. With that money, we could bring back to life our old building and also give job opportunities to some local practitioners. So we really wanted to do it. The reality was that the pace at which the funding was working didn't correspond to our pace at all. In that case was due to the fact that there were lots of bureaucratic things to be solved before we would get the funding. When finally we got it, they wanted us to basically use it in record time, like it needed to be finished by, I don't know, 1.5 years or 2 years. So this put us in a very uncomfortable situation. We are not accelerated at all. We are not meant to produce in this acceleration mood. So therefore, we had to figure out alternative strategies to understand how we would invest in that period of time, and then procrastinate some work to be done even once that specific timeline had actually finished. So as you can see, generally the moment someone or an entity of any sort is trying to accelerate us, we try to resist, I mean, when we can and the much we can. But yeah, I would say that we tend to verbalize our discomfort for the pace, but there are times in which there is no way we can slow down the pace that is imposed on us. So we don't have a special recipe to share with you today. I'm very sorry if you were waiting for that. So slowness is beautiful, but it's also quite difficult.
Hey, thank you so much for this answer. This is actually also the question I would like to pose. So I personally thank Noah for the question. I think we don't have any more questions on the horizon, and it's already 8 o'clock my time and Central.
Can I add something before we close?
Absolutely.
It's amazing to see lots of people that joined us today that were part of Vessel in different stages of our organization, artists, curators that came for the International Curatorial Workshop, or they were in residency with us. And also to see that people joined us from Scotland, from the United States, from Iran, from Israel, from the Netherlands, from Hong Kong. I mean, there is absolutely everywhere there, from Croatia. And thank you so much for coming. Today for us is also a very special celebration of the 10 years of Vessel. So it's good to have you all here and share it with you.
Thank you so much for these words, and I also want to thank the audience for being here. And you know, Viviana and Anna, you are extremely visible now, and you must be able to realize that your hopeful final words that they are really coming into fulfillment. So yeah, thank you again for a wonderful talk. I suggest that we all just give them a hand privately where we are. And it won't carry too well, and we can also do like this. So thank you so much. And before we close, there's more in store from us in Fine Art. We will take a summer break now in this lecture series, but in September, on the 23rd of September, we will have Massimiliano Molona giving a talk on art and the commons, internationalism, post-capitalism, and the radical imagination. And then in October, we will have Gabi Nkokopo from Pretoria in South Africa, who will talk about the role of art institutions and independent smaller art hubs for social change. So yes, thank you all. And I would just like to, I just hope that you will have a nice evening and see you all at the next Fine Art event. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bjorn.